Welcome back to another episode of Worldy Unboxed. Today we sit down with Tom Eddleston, the co-founder of Fabric, a non-alcoholic beer with a unique twist that we'll let Tom tell you about. Tom left the corporate world to pursue entrepreneurship and has some fantastic lessons for those interested in launching a venture. As always, follow our journey at worldybrand.com and check out our YouTube channel and Instagram page for more content and updates. All right, let's talk to Tom.
So Tom, thanks for coming on. I know me and Brandon, we talked to you probably for like 90 minutes each very recently, but just for our listeners, can you describe your background, your professional journey up to this point?
Yeah. Firstly, thanks for having me, guys. And it's been great getting to know the both of you. So I've been in the corporate world for the last 10 plus years, mostly in real estate private equity, and recently made the leap to CPG and have launched a venture.
And what is Fabric? How do you describe it?
I would describe Fabric as an alternative beverage company. So we are doing non-alcoholic beer, and then we're also doing THC-infused beer-adjacent beverages. So that'll be a beer as well as a hop water and potentially a few more beverages down the line.
What is hop water? I've heard of that before, but I'm not really a big beer drinker. I know that there's hops in beer, but I don't know what hop water is. Like, what actually is it?
A hop water is something between a LaCroix and a beer, where it is like a carbonated water that is dry hopped. So you get kind of the refreshing carbonation of the water and then the kind of beer taste and bitterness of the hops.
And how did you talked a little bit about your background. How did you initially get interested in CPG and entrepreneurship?
CPG, I think, maybe the same way as everyone else, just being a consumer, being really drawn to novel beverages and keeping an eye on like what's happening in that space. As a beer lover, I'd always been kept up to date on different beer trends and styles, and really loved the whole craft beer movement. And it's something that I've always felt quite passionately about, and probably less so that passion for the corporate world. So the real estate private equity was something I more or less fell into and really enjoyed, but kind of knew that it was never a passion for me. And so started kind of drifting into entrepreneurship when I did my MBA in Sydney in 2022. And at the same time as I was slowing down on drinking in general. So seeing the rise of the non-alc movement and then the pioneers in the space, such as Athletic Brewing, obviously in the US. And then I was in Australia at the time, and another company, Heaps Normal, kind of had the same like meteoric trajectory as Athletic. And so it kind of proved out that there was this new category that was emerging. And then in the past few years, we've seen that kind of non-alc movement collide with the hemp-derived THC beverage space. And so that kind of represented this huge opportunity, and there not being any true kind of beer alternative, that seemed like where we wanted to play.
And I know you talked a little bit about trends and just the way that the way people think about drinking is changing. So what kind of, I guess just like very simply, what is the problem that you think you're solving with this product?
Specific to this category, I'll start with the hemp derived. In the hemp derived space, we're seeing like a lot of THC infused beverages, and the market at the moment is saturated with seltzers, cocktails, mocktails, etc. A lot of them are either bland or sugary, and there hasn't really been any true beer adjacent THC-infused beverage. And so I think the problem we're solving is that there are there's 50% of American adults that are moving away from drinking. That's over 131 million people. The largest consumed alcohol category is beer. And that at the moment, there's a total of, the beer adjacent kind of THC SKUs I can count on one hand. So we think that there's not really any premium THC-infused beer that resembles the experience of your favorite domestic.
And then do you think there's a reason why that product doesn't exist? Because before I got into entrepreneurship, I would notice these gaps and be like, oh, this is such a great idea. And then I would look into it further and I'd realize, okay, there's a reason why nobody has done this before. Do you think that there are good reasons why people haven't done this before? Like, how do you think about that?
That's a great question. And yes is the answer. Firstly, the regulatory environment in this hemp-derived space is tricky to navigate. It's kind of a patchwork of regulation. And the sector only really began a few years ago when the Farm Bill enabled THC to be extracted from hemp and concentrated into a beverage. And so that very Farm Bill is coming back in front of Congress this year. And so there's a lot of speculation as to what happens thereafter. So firstly, I would say that the players in this space have quite a high risk tolerance, or otherwise they foresee that regulatory environment is going to go in their favor, which is a pretty bold bet. Secondly, in the beer space, the TTB says that you can't have a malt-based beverage and combine it with THC. So given that I would say 98% of beer contains malted barley as the base ingredient, that's a really hard thing to get around. And so the hack is that you need to come up with a true gluten-free grain bill. And so you can't have any malted barley whatsoever. And while you guys may have seen some gluten-free beers on the market, they still contain malted barley. There's a special brewer's enzyme that's typically used to remove, shouldn't say remove, but erode the protein that results in gluten in the malt. So basically, you have to have a very creative and very skilled brewer to be able to create a truly gluten-free beer that tastes like beer. And so that's one of the largest problems. And then, there's other issues as well, like just getting a beer to market involves pasteurization, which is another major expense and something that I would again say 90% of breweries don't have access to.
So does Fabric fall into that 2% category that isn't a malted, derived beer?
That's right. Yeah. So we have a very creative and celebrated brewer on board, and we are constantly iterating on getting to what we think can be the best on the market as far as a true gluten-free grain bill, and that allows us to be THC infused.
That's pretty cool. And kind of going back to that, you were talking about how Fabric is almost like a replacement to, an alcohol-based beer. How is it a more direct replacement than, just an NA beer or any other kind of like version of beer that doesn't have alcohol in it?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to have two adjacent businesses, and flagship is going to be just a non-alcoholic beer, a non-alcoholic pale ale, which will start brewing in May. And then because of that regulatory environment I was describing, we actually have a separate legal entity, which will be our THC-infused beverages. So with our non-alc beer, we really are mirroring what's on the market at the moment in the sense that we're trying to get as close to a full-strength pale ale without the alcohol. And as anyone that's tried a pale ale and a non-alc side by side, there's typically quite a big difference because the alcohol does contain so much flavor and really give the beer a character that's really hard to replicate without it. So we have, again, enlisted a creative brewer to try and solve for that problem. Then on the THC side, what we think is that, yes, there are non-alcoholic beers available, but you're obviously not getting a buzz from that product. And if your routine over the last 20 years has been on a Saturday afternoon, you sit on the lawn and drink a six-pack, and you're gradually getting a buzz over the course of the afternoon, NA is not going to replicate that experience. But if we have a low-dose THC beverage, and by low dose I'm talking in the range of 1.5 milligrams, then that's the kind of beverage that you'll get you barely notice the impact on the first one, but that you mirror that same experience and you have 6 over the course of an afternoon, and you're stacking that THC in your system, and you're getting the same buzz that you would from, a 4 to 5% ABV beer.
That makes sense. I was in preparation for this podcast, I was looking at some of the THC derived drinks that were out there, and yeah, their percentage is significantly higher. That's definitely a different take on making a THC, infused beverage.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a main point of difference that I'd like to kind of reiterate is that this industry, the Delta 9 hemp-derived THC, it's a derivative of the cannabis industry. And so a lot of the first movers in this space are coming from a marijuana background. And for anyone that's unfamiliar with the distinction, marijuana is not federally legal. It's at the state level. In states like Colorado, where Brandon, you and I sit, we have marijuana legalized in the dispensary. So we can go to a dispensary and purchase whatever we want, but that's a highly regulated and highly taxed industry. Then the hemp-derived thing popped up, as I mentioned, by way of the Farm Bill, and this loophole has created a whole new industry that is a bit of a gray zone at the moment. Hemp is typically regarded as, the industrial cousin of marijuana. It contains a much lower THC amount. In fact, it's a trace amount that, crafty extractors have, been able to extract that minute amount of THC and concentrate it into beverages. So when I talk about Delta-9 and specifically that, but I think because of the legacy cannabis users and entrepreneurs in this space, that they have a bit of a warped sense of reality, and they think that 5 milligrams of THC concentrated into a beverage is an entry point for new users. And as someone who is 6'2" and a fairly regular THC user, 5 milligrams is about my limit. That's like, I'm not trying to be sociable. I'm not trying to go out. Like, I'll be comfortably watching the TV with a little smirk on my face. And that's my 5 milligram experience. And the more you ask around, and I'd encourage you guys to do the same, you'll find that you typically get two answers when you ask someone their kind of ideal dosage. And it's either, 3 to 5 milligrams, or it's 20 to 30 milligrams. And that the latter is, the habitual user, people with an insane tolerance. But for most of us, and particularly those who are moving away from alcohol, not regular users, or maybe haven't touched THC in a decade, I think selling that person a 5 milligram beverage is doing a disservice not only to them, but to the category. Because if someone consumes this and spends their afternoon staring at the wall and, is just freaking out, then they're not going to go back to try and replicate that experience. So coming in at 1.5, we're really targeting our product at those 130 million American adults who are moving away from alcohol and looking for a viable alternative.
Gotcha. So I've been told, as you consume like edibles and things like that, it doesn't kick in right away. Like, it takes a little bit before you start feeling the effects of it, and it can kind of come all at once. And you're in a situation where you are kind of staring at the wall, or you're sitting on the couch with a smirk on your face. How does it work with Fabric? Is it something that like happens like, oh yeah, I drink the beer and I can kind of feel it, and that's going to be like the extent of it until I have another one? Is that how it's kind of like, is that how it works, I should say?
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, because so many people have the edible experience where, they try this thing. They don't know how much they like the dosage that they should be having to begin with. They throw back an edible and then wait an hour, nothing happens, and then they get completely blindsided. Or worse still, they wait an hour, nothing happens, and they double down and have another. And then it kicks in, and that's when you're really seeing stars. So the difference in that edible experience and THC in liquid form is that we are nano-emulsifying the THC. So you actually have a rapid onset. It will hit your bloodstream and you'll feel the impact in about 10 minutes. And so within 10 to 15 minutes, you're kind of feeling like, oh, there's a little something, but it's so subtle in this smaller dosage that you're not waiting for this thing to, totally blindside you. And that's what I fear is the experience when a first-time user goes for a 5 or worse, like 10 milligram can, is that they're fine until they're not. And then they're very much aware that there's THC in their system. And that experience of like euphoria and being relaxed is replaced by this anxiety and this awareness of, holy shit, I'm high and I'm in public.
No, right on. Last question before jumping right back into like Aaron's questions. You mentioned like you had this amazing brewer who has the skill to brew beer without malt, and then maybe like derive this like THC into the beverage that allows for, not instant, but very closely after impacts. Where'd you guys meet? Like, how'd you come in contact with this guy, and like, what's the backstory there?
Yeah, it was quite serendipitous, to be honest. There's been a few things with fabric that have felt that way, and just kind of reinforced to myself that we're on the right path. I mentioned I studied my MBA in Sydney, and after my time in Sydney, my now wife and I decided we were going to move back to the US. And prior to doing so, we spent a couple of months on the road, and we traveled all the way across Australia to Perth in Western Australia. And Perth is the most isolated city in the world. It's closer to fly to Bali than it is the next major city in Australia. So you're out there. I was telling a friend about my idea and my plan, and while in Perth, and he said, I've got a friend's brother, a loose connection, who's a brewer, owns a local tap room. You should have a chat. I thought, okay, maybe this is someone who can give me a little education about the brewing process, and that was the extent of it. But as we sat down, it became clear that he was pretty humble, that's for sure. And that as I peppered him with questions, he was one of the pioneers of the craft beer movement in Western Australia. He set up one of the first craft breweries and built that, exited that business, and then became a traveling consultant. And he's worked in around 50 breweries in 22 countries around the world. And so he's an operations expert. He then, mentioned in the conversation, oh, you're going to Colorado. I work for the US Brewers Association, and I'm a judge at Great American Beer Fest. And I'm also a judge on the panel at the World Beer Cup, which is considered the most prestigious beer competition in the world. And so I quickly developed this picture of the guy, and he mentions like, oh, I'm also a biochemist. And so, wow. Yeah, he's got quite the resume. And then he'd never really tried non-alcoholic beer. He was not familiar with the process whatsoever, but being so scientifically minded and just obviously a curious person in general, was up for the challenge. And so that was August of last year that we connected, and he's been kind of iterating on recipes since.
That's pretty dope. I guess pun intended. That's pretty dope. Like to be able to have that interaction, that serendipitous interaction. I feel like that comes up a lot between like Aaron and I. We've had a lot of those type of interactions ourselves. So that's really cool that you were able to come across him.
Yeah, I mean, even the way that you guys have met, and how you've arrived here and co-hosting this podcast. I mean, I think that's quite serendipitous.
Indeed.
Yeah, for sure. Do you, just in general, in terms of like working with the formulator and anyone else in the industry, did you find it kind of hard being an outsider trying to create a product that hasn't been done before? Because we're kind of like similar in that we are trying to create a product that isn't really on the market. And a lot of people who had a ton of experience, they were pushing back on a lot of different things that we were saying we wanted, saying like, it's impossible, or there's a reason why nobody does it this way, so you shouldn't do it this way. Did you kind of run into anything like that, or was it pretty easy to get your vision across and get someone to make that vision a reality?
Somewhere in between, I guess. I think that the non-alcoholic space had been so destigmatized by the time that I was, started looking at this. And again, crediting the kind of pioneers in this space who this industry really didn't exist 5 years ago. And the likes of Athletic have made, just a huge difference. So that was in our favor, was that I think a lot of brewers were seeing that beer sales were steadily declining. And so a category that they'd formerly rejected, they were suddenly having to pay attention to. And it's a bit that adapt or die. And so there was certainly a willingness to entertain non-alc beer. And then it was really just taking it that one step further and saying, well, hey, do we think we can replicate this in a gluten-free base, which would enable us to infuse THC? And I think where you find people that are curious and up for a challenge, that they'll say, hey, it's not going to be easy. There might be a long lead time for R&D, but for the right people, that's fuel to the fire. So I think any of the naysayers, and we get those all the time still, but it's more people that don't understand it, and it comes from like, why would you try non-alcoholic beer? Why would you bother? And I'm sure that's the kind of thing you guys get. It's like they don't see the vision. It takes sitting down with them for half an hour, and if they're actively listening, you can usually get your point across.
Yeah, and then I mean, beverage is notoriously like very, very hard. It's one of the hardest spaces you can get into. So do you have a lot of people say like, hey man, you should try something else. Like, this is pretty hard. Or is that not really something that naysayers are out there saying? Because we get that a lot with footwear too. Like, hey, footwear is really tough. You guys should maybe look into doing something else in a different industry.
Yeah, we definitely get that. And I think that's just entrepreneurship in general, though. You're always going to find those people who don't see the vision, want to shoot you down. And there's a lot of people who will say stuff like, it's already been done, right? Mm-hmm. And I think my easiest pushback for that kind of thing is like, okay, so of t-shirts. And you're telling me that there's not going to be another $1 billion athletic or apparel company that pops up in the next 5 years? Like, you're kidding yourself. And so you don't have to be this truly creative, unique, innovative idea. And I think a lot of the time, everything has been done before. You're just taking a novel approach to it. And that, in CPG, there is a bit of a unique opportunity at the moment because this THC-infused sector is so nascent. And then I guess non-alcoholic beer is only a few years behind that. But anyone that doesn't see it or it's pushing back, we just say, look at the data. Anecdotally, look at your own experience. Are you drinking less? Are the people around you drinking less? And once they kind of, piece it together, they quickly say, oh, okay, there might be something here.
Yeah. This is kind of like pretty interesting to me. So I'm curious to hear potentially your thoughts and also Brandon's thoughts, because I don't use THC. I don't really drink. Like, I probably haven't had a drink in like a year. And a lot of people are moving away from alcohol. I thought it was because they were not wanting that kind of like buzzed feeling. Like, there's certain like, I guess, health downsides to drinking. And also I thought maybe it's like anti being in a altered state, but then they're moving to almost like a cleaner buzz. So that indicates to me that people want to be buzzed. They want to be in an altered state, but they don't want the downsides. So like, what do you think about that? Is that the right way to think about that trend? Or like, why are people moving from one, quote unquote drug to another one?
Yeah, I want to hear Brandon's take on this first.
I mean, I recently started moving away from alcohol, and part of it is like health related. You see like a better quality of life when you don't consume. You're able to kind of, I guess, interact in a more positive way when it comes to just your day-to-day habits. And so that was one of the reasons. The other is just like, as I got older, it has like a longer impact on you. So a day of drinking when I was in my early 20s or whatever usually didn't impact me at all the next day. Like, I was able to kind of rebound relatively quickly, and it was not something that was detrimental to my day-to-day, at least as far as I can remember. And then later on in life, those impacts tended to elongate. Like, I tended to took a longer time for me to be back to normal, and it would impact the day after. And then it became a point where it impact like 2 days later. Maybe you're not like necessarily, but you wouldn't be functioning at your highest capabilities. So I started trying to figure out other ways in which I can interact socially without necessarily partaking in libations or anything like that. So that's to me, like, that's my motivation behind it. I know there's tons of different motivations out there as to why people are going the NA route or alcohol-free route. So that's just my take on it. And it was personal to me. That's like why I've been, lowering my consumption to like zero at this point.
So do you feel like you want that buzz still and just not having that downside, or like, how do you think about that part?
Yeah, I mean, that's not the bad part. Like, that was never the bad part. The buzz is never the bad part. It's typically, what comes afterwards. Like,
exactly, yeah.
Pay for that buzz. And so like that buzz comes with a price. And earlier in my life, I was willing to pay for it because it wasn't like a significant amount of cost. I assumed it wasn't a significant amount of cost. Maybe if I did the actual analysis, there was a lot that I paid for. But anyway, digressing from that, I don't know. I think that probably sums up my opinion on it. I'll hear from Tom.
I'm firmly in the buzz was never the problem camp, and that I think, like, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed drinking for a long time, and then I had the same experience as you, Brandon, where I'm now on the wrong side of 35, and hangovers hurt. And it's not just going out and, drinking 8 pints that'll ruin my following day. It's now 2. And that you're exactly right. That for me, I think like a few drinks will be a very light buzz. Like, you're not really getting much of the upside, and yet I will acutely feel the downside. And like with alcohol, so the way that alcohol works is, the depressant, all the, the sugars and the alcohol metabolizes in your system over the course of a few hours, and then the depressant becomes a stimulant. And that's why so many people will feel themselves staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep. And so sleep is one of the major issues with alcohol. And I think personally a big reason people are trying to kick booze, particularly midweek. If you don't sleep well, this rough research says that for every drink, your sleep is about 10% worse. And so, 3 drinks, that stacks for me. And then I'll be more inclined to sleep in, skip the gym. I'll get to work and feel like crap and will be unproductive all day. And then when I reflect upon that, I'm like, okay, that was 3 drinks over the course of 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it may be. It didn't stack. The benefit to downside didn't stack at all. But then when I started microdosing with THC, and I think a lot of people are moving towards shrooms decriminalized in Colorado, so microdosing there as well, and you get that euphoric feeling, you get a little bit of a light buzz. For those with a really active or racy mind, you get the kind of calm. And then like with THC, consume a few beverages in that low dose and then go home and sleep well and jump, spring out of bed and go to the gym. And so it just felt like, reinforced by the fact that the Surgeon General's just come out and said that alcohol should be labeled what it is, which is a carcinogenic. And so all those factors converging, I think there's this whole new opportunity and people saying, hey, actually, I'm willing to give that a try if I can get a similar buzz without the consequence.
What do you think about your target customer potentially being a health-oriented former frat bro? I don't know if you and Brandon were in frats, but it seems like you guys liked having good times, like drinking a lot. Like for me, I was friends with frat bros, but like I was never really a huge drinker. But it sounds like, as you get older, you kind of like still want to have that fun time. Yeah, that routine, but you're more focused on health. So what do you think about that as potentially being either your main target customer or one of your target segments?
I think that every frat bro hits an age where they start to feel the hangovers as well, and that the keggers are less appealing, or maybe it's just that they don't have any friends remaining to do the keg stands with because everyone's settling down and marrying and having kids. But no, of the frat bros that I know, there has been a lot of them seek a more active lifestyle. I think that COVID was a real turning point for a lot of people, where myself included overdid it on becoming a hobbyist cocktail maker and having happy hour every afternoon at 4 p.m. and really embracing that and probably overdoing it. And then coming out of COVID, the world opening up and being like, I don't want to be inside. I want to be outside. I want to feel good. I want to take advantage of just being in the open, where a lot of that 2-year period was spent confined. And so I would say, at least anecdotally for me, that experience has been pretty widespread, and that a lot of people have become more health oriented, have joined run clubs, they've bought a bike, they're going to the gym, they're having a cold plunge in the morning, a sauna in the evening, whatever it may be, but they're drinking less in general, and they're still trying to get that buzz, still trying to see friends, but it's not partying until 2 a.m. like they once were.
That makes sense. And then where are you at in the process in terms of the product? Is it done? Have you started testing it? Like, where are you in that process?
Yes, we've got a non-alcoholic pale ale is production ready, and we are brewing that in May. We have our hop water, which is also production ready, and that'll be brewed at the same time. And then our THC-infused beer, the gluten-free base I mentioned, we've perfected that on a small scale, but one thing we've learned is that it's a very different experience going from a glorified home brew to a production brewery. And so there are a lot of scaling issues that you encounter along the way. And then for this specific product, there's also specific equipment that's required as well. So I would say our THC-infused non-alcoholic beer will probably be a month or 2 behind, just as we really want to get that dialed and for that to be a kind of a flagship product of ours. And we want to make sure that we're proud of what we put out.
So you'll be selling the product for the first time in May. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's very soon, right? That's 60 or so days, 75 days maybe max. How are you feeling as you approach that date?
Excited. It's very soon, but it can't come quick enough. Being able to play with this on a small scale and have these beverages and get your friends excited and be really excited about where we're at. We just want to be able to share that. And so it's definitely a little daunting because I think most people in the CPG space will say that's when the hard work begins. And yeah, there's also go-to-market strategy, there's capital to worry about, there's distribution, there's all those considerations. But I'd say we're excited more than nervous at this stage.
Makes sense. And you mentioned this to me before, but can you remind me what the strategy is in terms of channels? I know you mentioned direct to consumer, also retail, but can you just describe how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I mentioned earlier as well was that we have these two kind of adjacent opportunities. We've got two business lines, non-alcoholic beer and then the THC infused space. So that actually gives us a built-in hedge in the event that the regulatory environment turns against us. And so given that the Farm Bill, maybe back in front of Congress this year, that's kind of informing our go-to-market strategy. And so I would say overwhelmingly demand is outstripping supply on that THC infused side, whereas the non-alcoholic beer, there's a few more years of product development there and a lot more really solid options on the market. So we have these kind of two distinct but complementary go-to-market strategies. The beer will be more Colorado-based. We'll be launching in our own home market, and we will be targeting 1 to 200 key accounts. So trying to get into the top bars, restaurants. Cool thing about non-alc beer is you can also be at cafes, at retail, really anywhere, and potentially select grocers as well. But our intention more is to do the brand building exercise and be in the right venues and appealing to that target customer. From there, we would look to demonstrate that we are outperforming the market and that our sell-through rate is higher than our competition, and then take that data to the Whole Foods of the world, to the Total Wines, to the larger chains, and expand regionally and then nationally with them. The flip side of that coin is the THC infused side, where we already have distributors approaching us and saying, hey, we want exclusive rights to the whole of Texas, and we want to put you in liquor stores, grocery stores, convenience stores, movie theaters, whatever it may be, really wherever they can get that product in. I think usually if you're doing the brand building exercise, you might stray away from that because you don't have the brand behind you yet and you're trying to build that loyalty and awareness. But as I mentioned, there is just such demand for this product, and we'll have the direct to consumer channel happening at the same time, that we think that that is actually probably the optimal strategy for us at the moment is shotgun. Get it out there far and wide. And our only limitation there would just be one, production capacity, and then capital in the early stages.
Makes sense. And then what would you say is your longer term vision for the company? What's your big vision or big goal for the company, let's say 5-10 years down the road?
I would say that we would like to be a national brand and a household name. We've seen a lot of young brands in the non-alc beer category do that extremely well. I think we're seeing that in the THC infused space with brands like Breeze, who have come onto the scene only 18 months ago and are making a really, really big splash. I think our longer term trajectory is a bit like a flow chart at the moment, where it'll depend on the outcome of that hemp-derived THC space and how much that gets clamped down. But that, again, is the beauty of our business model, is that we have the hedge in that if there were an outright federal ban on THC derived from hemp, we would simply sell off our remaining inventory and then funnel all of our proceeds and then our collective efforts into expanding our non-alc beer business. So yeah, the 5-year goal looks the same, is that it's a household brand, really becoming like an incumbent in these two explosive categories. But in the event regulatory turned against us, that would be concentrating that into just the non-alc beer and really being a dominant force in that market.
And are you building with acquisition in mind at all? I don't know if you saw that Poppy just got acquired for $1.5 billion by Pepsi, but is that, I mean, obviously like a lot of us would want to be acquired for that amount of money, but is that something that you're kind of thinking about as you're building the company from day one, or how are you thinking about acquisition or an exit?
Yeah, I think you have to be. I come from the investment management world, so I think to be a fiduciary and put your investors' interests first, that it seems to me like very bad practice, if you will, to not at least make yourself an acquisition target or candidate. And so for us, that just meant, investing in the right legal guidance from day one, ensuring that you're structured such that you would be an acquisition target from a larger buyer, and then just knowing who that might be. I think there's a lot of companies, startups in general, that start down this path and think that anyone or everyone could be a prospective buyer. And that's simply, it's just not the case. Like it was Pepsi who was proceeding with that acquisition after people speculated it might be Coke. And Coca-Cola hasn't been as acquisitive over the years. And so Pepsi was a more logical buyer. We think the same way. Like if you look at this space as well, there's a cannabis company, Tilray Brands, that has bought up so many craft breweries in the US that a cannabis company is now the 5th largest craft brewer in the country. And so for us, we look at that and say, if we are utilizing the same infrastructure, using beer infrastructure, breweries, and there's a cannabis buyer who is out there, we would be a logical acquisition target for them. Then you'll see Green Thumb Industries, who took a run at Boston Beer last year. And I think there's a lot of these cannabis companies that see the writing on the wall. So I think it's only responsible that we kind of position ourselves such that we could be a target, and then we make the decision if that, falls in our lap.
Makes a lot of sense. And then for these next few questions, we're going to try to make them a bit more kind of like back and forth, or more kind of like discussion based versus just grilling you with a bunch of questions about your company. So if you have any questions for us as we kind of go through these, just feel free to ask. Me and Brandon have been thinking about this almost like dichotomy in terms of how to think about our company, whether it's product-led or founder-led. And kind of what we've landed on is that we have to be founder-led in the early days because nobody really sees a new product and nobody really sees a new shoe and automatically thinks that it's going to be better or maybe even comparable to a Nike, for example. But then as you kind of get that reputation, then you can be more product-led as you have more customers who are able to talk about how your product is superior or whatever. When I talked to you last time, I think you mentioned wanting to be a brand-led company, which we hadn't really thought about, but what made you land on that? And I know that 2 of your co-founders are both kind of from a branding background. So is that what kind of swayed you to at least start with being a brand-led company?
Yeah, for sure. I think that in CPG, as with kind of any consumer good, that there's a few kind of core pillars. Like the product's obviously got to be very good, but the product in some ways becomes irrelevant if you don't have the brand to back it up. And founder-led and brand-led, I think, go hand in hand. But what was really important to us was to have a cool brand, something that resonated with us, resonated with our target audience, and we felt like, regardless of the product, would capture attention. And even since our launch just a couple of weeks ago, I think it's evident that works. And so getting really skilled creatives involved early just makes logical sense. And, Buffett would say brand is the moat. And then you've got guys like Mike Cesario of Liquid Death, who proved out the same thing. He was a creative and he saw the opportunity. And yeah, I think that's really what kind of helped inform our thinking.
Do you think that's a sustainable moat though over time, especially with like the Liquid Death example? Because I don't think they're not profitable, right? And I don't know if they really have a clear path to profitability. So I think it validates certain things, but in other ways, I'm like, man, I don't know if just having a great brand is enough. Like that example almost makes me more kind of focused on you have to have a really differentiated product if you want to be profitable. So how do you think about that?
I don't think that I think there's maybe a false binary there that like you don't, just because you're brand led doesn't mean that you have to be Liquid Death and that you have to pursue growth at the expense of profitability. And that's often what you see, right? Is like companies it's this VC mentality from the tech days of if you are profitable, you're not growing fast enough. And so, yeah, growth at any expense saw Liquid Death go into the UK and kind of flop there and pull back. But I would say, for those guys to have launched a canned water and be worth $1.2 billion is pretty wild. And that moat is sustained. I mean, anyone that comes after them now in the water category and is an outrageous water in a can is an obvious ripoff that people turn their nose up at. And so I think that, product, we're both in categories where someone can and will replicate our product. And so you've got to find the balancing act of like, your product is exceptional, and then you have a really cool brand that resonates with people, and then you guys have found a lead and you're out there and people enjoy the content you're pushing out. And then there's, for us, like really important is purpose as well. And so kind of marrying profit and purpose and saying, we give back because we don't want to be lumped into the, extractive profit at all costs kind of companies. And so, I think it's just trying to find that balancing act.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned wanting to give back. I think I've seen that for you, it's a focus on sustainability and then also mental health. Are those the two, or is there anything else, or is it those two?
Yeah, that's really mental health being the big one for us. And then just a broader goal of doing things as sustainable as we can. And I think that's an evolving goal. Like no company is perfect, but it's important for us for that to kind of inform all of our decisions.
Definitely. And mental health is something that has come up a couple times on our podcast. And it's something that we're being a little bit more intentional about, trying to like step back and take stock of our mental health and think about ways to make sure that we're prioritizing that as we start a business with full-time jobs, because it's very difficult. So for you, like, how do you feel like that transition has been from real estate, private equity to starting a business in terms of like mental health? And are there any strategies that you've found have worked to kind of deal with? Because it's a very high stress, at least in my opinion, high stress occupation. So how have you been dealing with that?
Yeah, it is high stress, low salary. So it's, it takes, I think, certain people to want to go down that path versus turning away kind of the cushy corporate job. But for me, I found the mental health toll of working a job that I didn't love and that I wasn't passionate about it anyway. I found myself, staring out the window and just contemplating what the hell is this my existence for the next 30 years? And in that corporate environment, a lot of the time it is. And I think I spoke to Brandon about this, but I did what I would call the boardroom check of like, look around the boardroom, and is there anyone in that room whose life you envy or whose career you want to emulate in any way? And if the answer is no, then why the hell are you trying to claw your way up this ladder at the expense of the next, potentially 20, 30 years in order to retire at 65? So, I think mental health wise, this has been hugely positive for me. And I'm working more hours than I ever have, but I'm more motivated. The impact you make, moving the needle on the day to day, you can really see and feel. And at a corporate, when you're kind of a cog in the machine, that is just not the case. And then when, your annual bonus is tied to the company's stock performance, like you can bust your ass 20 hours a day. And if the company doesn't perform, then that bonus is not there. A long way of saying that, I think my mental health has probably never been better. And that's just finding something that I'm passionate about and leaning into it.
Was it hard to get out of the golden handcuffs? That's something we talked about before. But
I was going to ask, okay, gradual transition when you had that epiphany, or was it like, hey, I'm out, like I'm gone, deuces, and like, going into my entrepreneurial like stage of life?
Yeah. So I mentioned I did the MBA in 2022, and during that time, kind of caught the entrepreneurial bug and was really thought that's what I'm going to do. Then just prior to the end of my MBA, a recruiter called me and said, hey, how does coming back to real estate investment management, sound? And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. And they basically made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I said, hey, I've still got
to golden handcuffs.
Man, first world problems, huh?
Yeah.
And so I kind of said like, hey, I've still got a couple of months remaining of my MBA. I would need to be part-time. Wouldn't want to go full-time until I finish up. I'd want to take a few weeks off before, between starting, and really was kind of pushing them to say, no, too bad. And they said, yep, all sounds good. See you next week. And so it was a case of like, maybe it'll be different this time. And it was also a bit of a too good to be true. And I went back to it, and sure enough, it just felt like the definition of insanity, and was probably what I needed to get me over the line and make me fully commit.
One of the other things that we've heard from some people is like, once you go down the entrepreneurial path, there's no turning back. Like, you just can't go back to a corporate job because it's just not as fulfilling. So I know you're talking about potentially like getting acquired down the road. And so you're not necessarily thinking about this as this is going to be your job for the rest of your life. So, if you have a really successful exit, if you sell for $1 billion in 10, 15 years, do you think you could go back to a corporate job? Would you have to start something else? Or like, how would you think about what would be next?
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. It's like, I'm 6 months into this, and I feel like it would be very, very difficult to go back. And I totally understand how people say they couldn't do it. And I think there's so many opportunities out there once you start to open your eyes a little bit. And if you have the successful exit, obviously that gives you a lot of credibility, and then you can play angel investor, you can be an advisor, you can go and partner up with VCs, you can get involved at a fractional level with different companies, and you can take that knowledge and those lessons you've learned and help the next generation. Yeah, I think mentorship in this space is huge. Like, it's truly invaluable because it just helps you get up that learning curve so much quicker. And so, yeah, whether we sold or not, I would love to remain involved in the business for as long as I possibly could do. And otherwise, yeah, absolutely, I'd be looking to remain involved in the startup world in some capacity. It's so exciting relative to the corporate grind.
And would you recommend that if someone is, just graduating college, or they're 23, 24 years old, whatever, and they're interested in entrepreneurship, would you tell them just to jump into it right away? Or would you recommend that they take a corporate job, kind of like you've done, like I did?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think there's two pathways. It's like, if you can get in with a startup and you are passionate about it, like if it's something that is really aligns with your values or interests, and assuming you're early 20s, you're probably not going to be like, unless you're founding your own company, you might just be a bit of a generalist helping out where you can, and probably not starting at the co-founder level. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be well paid, but it would be an amazing way to learn generalist skills in a startup environment that would absolutely carry you forward. For me, going into the corporate world, I think that the huge advantage that I have, and I think for you guys as well, is that you've seen best practice. You've seen an institutional environment, with law degrees, and like for me with a finance background, having that core skill set is really, really helpful. And although I'm far from a lawyer, I know enough to be dangerous, and I can negotiate contracts, and I can speak the language, entity structure and formation. And those things are, I think, a massive leg up on someone who has just decided that, they're a home brewer and they've come up with a recipe that they want to scale. If they don't have any of that background or knowledge and business acumen, it's going to be a much more difficult path for them.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about writing up contracts. And I know that we talked last time about your strategy for working with advisors and how that's a bit unique. So can you explain how you set up those arrangements? Because essentially you have advisors who you bring in who they kind of invest in the company, but then if you want, you reserve the right to pay them out in cash for their time. I think I have that at least somewhat right. So could you just explain kind of like how you go about doing that?
Yeah. I guess I would just say that I'm like massively pro advisor. Bringing in anyone you can. I think it helps you remain lean, and that the whole team benefits from the expertise on an hourly rate. So what we structured, there's a couple of ways to do this, but I think a common trap is that startups will pay someone a percentage, like, I'll give you 1% of the company, and then for a few hours of your time each week. And that didn't really sit well with us, but we thought, if you can come up with an agreeable hourly rate, so let's say $200 an hour for someone who is a 20-year expert in a field, it's not a huge amount of money for them. But if you can pique their interest in the concept and what you're doing, then it's fun for them, right? It's like them being able to step in and see the inner workings and provide a bit of, help steer the ship. And so that's really what we did. We just said, $200 an hour that will accrue as an equity position, and that we're currently raising a safe round. And so no one's equity, whether it's dollars invested today or our advisors, none of that will vest until the time of our first price round. And so we kind of said, that you'll have the ability to invest at a discount should you want to and kind of increase your stake. And that importantly, as you said, Aaron, we reserve the right to pay them out in cash. So once cash flow becomes a little easier, if it's an advisor you haven't utilized much and they have a $2,000 stake in the company, it's just adding a bit of noise to your cap table. So we would just pay them out in cash, or we give them the opportunity and say like, hey, we have a 10K minimum, invest, and then you've aligned incentives even further. So, and that's kind of a simple mechanism we've used to bring on board, I'd say, about 8 different advisors that have been just a wealth of knowledge and have already helped us avoid some kind of easy pitfalls.
Pause and let Brandon, as the lawyer, if he has any follow-up questions, ask them.
No, I think that's a really good way of doing it and not really that far off from what we were doing. So we would have like, in essence, kind of like pilot runs with the potential advisor. So we'd have like some type of like contractual relationship where it was cash based. And during that time period, we'd be able to kind of evaluate the relationship. Both us and the potential advisor could evaluate the relationship and determine whether or not it made sense for both of us to kind of formalize it a bit more and make it a bit more long lasting. And so it wasn't necessarily different from what you're doing. Yours is a bit more streamlined. I like that approach. You kind of go in with a bit more of a understanding of where the end game is. Whereas in our situation, it was a bit more amorphous. So I like it. I mean, from a legal perspective, I think it's great. From like a founder perspective, I think it's awesome. Like, I think it's even better from like a founder perspective because you're able to have those type of like advisors as a part of the company, even if they're just like a contractor. And then you're able to kind of develop that relationship and align incentives so that you can have those longer term, really beneficial, mutually beneficial relationships that you really want anyway. So like, I think it's we're probably going to steal it. That's what I'm getting at. Probably going to steal that approach.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, as you said, it's not too dissimilar to your approach. And it's paying dividends already for us because we've got advisors who become your advocates and, they'll post on LinkedIn on your behalf and help you kind of generate followers and early traction. And if that results in nothing more than like an email on our, follow along page, then that's traction. So, I would encourage you to steal it.
Okay, not steal it. A better way of saying it, we're going to acquire it.
Acquire it. Amending your contract, Brandon.
Acquire it for free.
Yeah. Do you have a hard stop at 3:15 or can you go a little bit over?
I'm good.
Okay. So just in general for us, Brandon was saying that we've kind of had some advisors. We don't have any formal equity advisors, and it's been kind of easy for us to get mentors and then people who are contractors who act as advisors kind of like while they're under contract. But we've struggled a little bit to get those equity advisors in terms of like just getting their interest or like identifying the right people or, even really being able to contact some of the people that are more lofty advisors. So what advice would you give to the people like us who we feel like we have the product, we have a good business plan, we're just trying to surround ourselves with people who can help us essentially increase our chances of success? Like what advice would you give to us to find the right advisors?
I think you'll see, 100 different LinkedIn posts with different advice on this. But what I've found that has worked for us is personalizing the outreach. First of all, making sure it's not a generic AI kind of pitch, and ideally doing a little digging on that person's background. What are they interested in? Is there something in common? Is it they say that they are a mental health advocate? Did they go to the same school as you? Do they grow up in the same part of the world? Keeping your outreach succinct and taking an interest in that person. I think flattery goes a long way. Just trying to get the initial phone call, telling them you're looking for paid advice. I think the word paid will capture a lot of attention. Whereas if you're just seeking a mentor or free advice, it may not land in the same way. And then that's all you're doing, right? I think it's the same as idea as a resume. You're just trying to pique someone's interest and get the phone call. And from there, it's on you. the final piece of that is just not taking it personally. Like it's a numbers game. The top advisors and people whose input you may really want are the ones who are probably getting absolutely hounded, and their DMs are blowing up constantly. So if you shoot out 100 and you get a response of 10, then that's not a bad hit rate.
And for you, like, how did you think about beer people versus beverage people versus people with just general entrepreneurship experience? Did you have a priority or preference, or like, how did you go about kind of filling out that team in the right way?
Yeah, I think beer people was pretty logical for us because both the products that we're talking about utilize the same infrastructure, and a lot of beverage, especially the hemp-derived stuff, is utilizing beer infrastructure, and that distributors are looking to backfill a lot of the volume that is falling away as people stop drinking. And what we also found was a lot of people from the alcohol industry and beer particularly had quit because they didn't want to drink anymore. We've got one of our advisors was a co-founder of a very prominent brewery in Colorado, and he couldn't do it. He said his sales management role, the expectation was that he was drinking on the job all the time, and it just took such a toll on him and his life and his body. And then our co-founder, Hunter Smith, same story. He founded a brewery, took that brewery national, was distributing in something like 13 states, and he's been sober now 3 years. And so for him, he felt that at this point in his life, THC was a way better experience all round. So yeah, beer people was fairly logical, but we've connected with a ton of CPG people, and LinkedIn, I think, is just in general an invaluable resource.
Definitely. And then one of the other things that we talked about was, you have a financial background, and you said that you haven't built a financial model, and that's mainly because it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. So can you just talk a little bit about that? I think I agree with you kind of like 95%, but can you just kind of describe the thought process there?
Yeah, that might be a contentious one. It's funny because, coming from that investment world, used to working in models that are Excel sheets that have 20 tabs and that they take a year to build, and they're extremely complex. I think what you learn the further you get down the road is that the only thing we know for sure is that your financial model is wrong. Like none of us have a crystal ball. And so it's more about simplifying and saying, what is the probability of hit or miss? And that a lot of it is noise, to be honest. And so, yes, we will create a very detailed financial model at the point that that's required. But I think a lot of people think that they need to have a buttoned up model before they leave their job, before they commit to this full time. And that, there's just so many factors, from how much capital you have to do your first production run, what are your go-to-market strategies, who are your wholesalers, in which state are you using different wholesalers, are you using different distributors, what ingredients do tariffs affect, and all those things you can obsess over and try and get your margins dialed. But for us, it's really like, okay, this is how many dollars we have, this is the best use of those dollars, and then trying to negotiate favorable payment terms such that, we're receiving cash on delivery or shortly thereafter is far more important in like focusing on that relationship than understanding that your margin is 3 cents per can different in one way or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we have about kind of like 5 minutes of rapid fire questions that we wrap up with. But before we get into those, if you have any like last things that you want to discuss or questions for us, we're happy to answer those.
No, having grilled you both on your business with Worldy, I don't think there's too much. I mean, I am still excited to see you guys jump in head first, but I know that might still be a few months yet.
Indeed.
Yep. So what keeps you up at night about your business?
Capital raising.
And why is that?
It is such a balancing act early on to try and you want to raise the right amount of money. You want to avoid paying yourself and your employees to the extent possible, and that every dollar is dilutive at this stage. So it's just about deciding how much to raise, where from. Is that strategic investors? Is that friends and family? Is that more institutional? And there's no right answer. And so I think that's one that we kind of obsess over. And then if you are trying to retain as much of ownership as possible, then yeah, this is when the dollars raised are the most dilutive. So being mindful of that and trying to tailor your strategy accordingly.
And what would you say has been the hardest part about your entrepreneurial journey to date?
Money, again, it would be, it's very tough going from a very well-paid job and defined benefits and a pretty predictable annual bonus to $0. And then that's something that I feel very strongly about early on, needing to demonstrate to investors that you can will this thing into existence and that you can use the money well and that you are disciplined. It's, the lifestyle adjustment, I'd say, more than anything.
And what would you say has been the most rewarding part?
Building a team. We've got an amazing team, and that has been also quite serendipitous, like how that's come about. The people that we've pulled together, the vision being so well aligned between our team, and then just seeing the reception as we've kind of began talking about it, and the interest and the excitement around the concept.
And what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started?
Well, everyone is figuring it out as they go.
We definitely are. So
yeah,
we can relate. And what advice do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs?
Once you feel strongly enough about the idea, just take the leap and don't look back. I think, as you guys know well, so many ideas will evolve. And I know that Worldy for you guys is different today than what you imagined it being, only 12 months ago. And I think you hear that story constantly, regardless of the category, that it evolves and shifts. And so long as that passion is there, that just do it. You won't regret it. And I think the risk of doing nothing far outweighs the risk of failure.
Agreed. And then what does success look like for you, however you want to define that, whether that's in life, in your career, with Fabric, what does success look like?
Success for me in the near term will be having a job that pays me, a job that I've created myself, that pays me anywhere near what I was earning in the corporate world. That would be like, I've done it. Thereafter, I think it is trying to stay true to sticking with the things that you're interested in, making decisions that aren't always financial based, and then just having the freedom to kind of check out. And living in Colorado, that means going mountain biking and snowboarding and like trying to enjoy the freedom that comes with your own schedule, even when that can mean it can be very hard to switch off.
Yeah, makes sense. And where can people find you in Fabric?
At the moment, we are on LinkedIn. You can see Fabric, our company page. You'll find myself and our co-founders, Haley Jordan and Anthony Bradley, our COO, Hunter Smith, and then we are at drinkfabric.com. Drinkfabric.com is our landing page, and there's not too much there at the moment, but throw your email in and we'll keep you posted.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I'm sure we could have you back on and discuss some things in more detail, but this was great. It was a lot of fun to have you on and a lot of good lessons, I think, that came out of this.
Yeah, thanks guys. Really enjoyed it. And look forward to the next one.